So it is noon and we have a full agenda to get underway. So I don't want to take up any more time. For those of you who are connecting, please continue to do so. You won't miss anything of the conversation. So welcome and thank you for joining us from across Canada and around the world. My name is Tina and I'll be helping out a little bit from behind the scenes today. I do hope that you're looking forward to this special hour where you'll hear from two organizations leading Cuso's gender equality efforts in Cameroon and Peru. But before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement from where I am in Toronto. For those of you who may be a little bit less familiar, land acknowledgements are a common practice in civic and community spaces. Across Canada, they are a small but important step towards reconciliation. For non-Indigenous Canadians, it's an opportunity to reflect on the impacts of colonialism and to be accountable to the Indigenous people. Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we're grateful to be able to work and live on this land. So as I said, you're in for a very special town hall where you'll hear from Cuso's program partners, but we also have an esteemed moderator, Rosemary McCarney. So please allow me to introduce everyone via their bios. Rosemary McCarney is a Cuso International board member, an award-winning humanitarian, international development expert, business leader, public speaker, and author. Rosemary is the 2021 Senior Fellow in Foreign and Defense Policy at Massey College, University of Toronto. She currently teaches multilateral diplomacy and global governance at Trinity College, University of Toronto, where she was appointed the inaugural 2020 Pearson Sabia Distinguished Visiting Professor in International Relations. She is an award-winning author of several children's books, bringing to life human rights and responsibilities to a new generation of human rights activists. From September 2015 to 2019, Rosemary served as ambassador and permanent representative of Canada to the Office of the United Nations Conference on Disarmament based in Geneva, Switzerland. Immediately prior to this appointment, she successfully led Plan International Canada as president and chief executive officer. Welcome, Rosemary. If you can unmute yourself and just say a quick hello.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina, very much. Hello, everyone.
And joining her is Carmen Espinoza, Executive Director of Manuela Ramos, a nonprofit Peruvian feminist organization led in Lima, Peru. Since 1978, Manuela Ramos has worked to improve the situation and position of women and girls. And under Carmen's leadership, MMR is focused on ending violence against women, promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights, and increasing women's participation in decision-making. Prior to joining MMR, Carmen was a longtime Cuso staffer in Lima, Peru, so she can't get rid of us. Carmen, if you want to unmute yourself and say a quick hello.
Hello. After I retired from working in Cuso, my friends from Manuela Ramos called me again, and then I came back to work. So I brought to Manuela Ramos what I had learned from working with Cuso.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carmen. And also joining us is Justine Gauchu Numkumche, the Executive Director of Women in Alternative Action in Cameroon. She is a champion of women's rights. Justine has enabled dialogue by engaging the Cameroonian advocacy network, Queens for Peace. Her organization is actively advocating for legislation that will change the legal age of marriage in Cameroon, so the country's laws is aligned with accepted international conventions. More recently, Justine's organization has been pursuing initiatives related to peace and security by engaging women in peace processes. Welcome, Justine. If you can unmute yourself and say un petit bonjour, a little hello.
Hello, bonjour, bonjour.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So just a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get right into it. There is a Q&A box. I think you've all seen that in the middle of your screen. If you're using a computer, that is. If you're on the telephone, that's a different story. But we invite you and encourage you to ask us questions as you hear things, to use the Q&A box to do that. And we'll make sure that we leave time at the end for those questions to be answered. I'll also invite you to participate in polls. And I think the best way for us to understand what polls are is for me to launch one right now. So I've just launched a poll, and it should read on your screen: gender equality is a human right. What barriers hinder women and girls from accessing their basic human rights? And so you have a selection of answers there that you can participate in right now. I'll just leave this up for a couple of seconds. I know there's many of you on the line, but we just wanted you to get a sample and a taste of what polls are like. So I'll end this one and we'll come back to the results a little bit later. And I'll put up a second one now that you have a great feel for what polls are. What do you think Cuso partner programs should provide to reduce gender inequalities? And there you also have 3 selections that you can choose from. And again, we do want to start with our conversation. So I will end this poll and we'll come back to the answers a little bit later. So thank you for your participation. At this time, I would like to hand things over to Rosemary McCarney for her opening remarks and a conversation with Carmen and Justine on creating change for women and Cuso's gender transformative partnerships and their impact. So at this time, I'm going to stop the presentation and you'll be able to see all the speakers on screen. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tina, and thank you to the Cuso team, both those who are online and those behind the scene, like Linda and Catherine, and in particular Tina, who has done so much heavy lifting to bring us all together successfully today. It's wonderful, and thank you for the lovely introductions. I have to say it's a huge honor to be part of Cuso's governance structure, and I'm hoping as a new board member that I'm able to provide some value. But more importantly, I think as well to get to know more of you in the months and perhaps the years ahead. So it's wonderful to be part of my first Cuso Town Hall today. What I'd like to do, hopefully, is we're all going to imagine that Justine and Carmen and I are sitting around in 3 chairs having a great conversation about a really fundamental issue of creating sustainable change for women is the way I would rephrase it. It's, you know, it struck me as I was thinking about this day and this round table is that, you know, these days, I'm going to be honest, I sometimes feel we're trying to stop losses on gender equality and, you know, put brakes on backsliding that's taking place on our achievements rather than advancing so much of what's still left to be done in gender equality in every corner of the world. But I know that our 2 panelists today, Justine and Carmen, will give us confidence that indeed we are continuing to make transformative change despite the challenges we find ourselves in of a devastating pandemic that has left no country, not one country, unmarked by its economic and social consequences. So today I'm hoping that in this conversation, we're able to examine a number of things with our panelists, but also with our audience during the Q&A. Things like, how are things different or change as a result of COVID-19? And how do we think the recovery will happen in our communities of focus as members of Cuso and partners of Cuso? And you know, yesterday morning I had a long roundtable discussion with Civicus, with board members across the world and members, and many of you I believe would be part of Civicus in your respective areas. And one of the things we talked about at great length is how the space for civil society activists, human rights activists, including gender equality activists, how that space has shrunk and in fact become more dangerous. So please keep putting your questions into the Q&A box. I'll keep monitoring it as we begin the conversation, and we do want to leave enough time for a very good conversation with all of you. So let's begin. So Carmen and Justine, first, thank you, and again, a wonderful welcome. Carmen, the first question to you, sitting in Peru, can you speak a little bit on what does gender equality look like? How is it understood in Peru? How is it changing? You know, what is it that you're experiencing? Over to you.
In Peru, we say that there are two types of pandemic. COVID-19 is one pandemic and violence is another pandemic. In relation to education, as in many other countries, connectivity is a barrier for children to attend classes from home. But violence has continued during all this time. And some statistics, the number of women that have died during last year has not increased much. Who have been assassinated by men, it hasn't increased much. But what we have seen is women disappearing. We have more than 5,000 women that have disappeared during the pandemic. And that is, they have run away from home. They have been subject to commerce as slaves, or they have been killed. And we will find out later. So this is a key issue that we're struggling to work on. As part of our programming, we have Cuso International supports our volunteering programming. And as part of that programming, we have psychologists. And so during the pandemic, the Ministry of Women implemented a counseling service through phone. With this counseling service, we provided 5 psychologists. And it was amazing how the tolerance to violence is even without those women who phoned because they fear they could have physical violence, but they were not aware that what they were living already was psychological violence. So this is a key issue that we work on to prevent, to fight the tolerance we as a society have towards violence. In polls that we have just had, it's been said that women have to fulfill, 53% say that women have to fulfill the roles as mothers and wives. Only then they can fulfill the roles as women. And more than 50% of people asked think that women should receive physical punishment if they are found to be unfaithful. So there's still a lot of work to be done. It is in this line that Cuso supports the deconstruction of the concepts that we have towards men and women. It is this construction that is important to change stereotypes, to change the minds of children, teenagers, everybody to grasp really that we women are as human beings as men.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carmen. And thanks for just setting the stage so well in terms of, you know, the pre-existing underlying inequalities and injustices around women before the pandemic have certainly been revealed in acute form, amplified and expanded. And it really does challenge us in terms of how do we actually use the knowledge, the increasing awareness, I guess I would say, for the building forward. And so thanks for setting a great tone for today. Carmen, I'm turning to you now. And thank you again for joining us from Cameroon. Perhaps you can also speak to the situation in Cameroon in your region, but perhaps you could also talk about a little bit about what's similar and what's different from the experience that Carmen has shared with us from Peru. And you'll have to go off mute.
Thank you, Rosemary. Before I start, I would like to briefly honor my mother and share a poem that I wrote on the International Women's Day about my mother.
Nice.
And thank you for allowing me to do so. Blessed Mother Sarah, words are not enough to express the delight of my heart. You brought me forth and guided my path. I celebrate you, Mother Sarah, because of who you are. So calm, yet courageous, hardworking and forbearing, forward-thinking and open-minded. The peacemaker, my mentor you are. The love of all, the shoulder to lean on. You're amazing, Mother Sarah. Age is your strength. You maintain the pace. Late to bed, early to rise. Have this to work, your hands will stretch forth. God bless your day, the resounding echo as I take off. Behold the beautiful smile of welcome that crowns my day. Gold you are, the great leader and mentor with the beautiful heart. The lone child as Sarah of old, and yet your generation like the stars. And we call you Blessed Mother Sarah. Happy International Women's Day to the most achieving lady of my life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a wonderful gift. As a mother, it's a lovely gift. Thank you.
Thank you. As I continue, I just want to thank the team of Cuso in Cameroon, Odette, Francis, for identifying my organization to be able to partner with. And I thank the organizers of this event. I want to say that the context of Cameroon when it comes to gender equality is quite specific, though not quite different from what Carmen has presented. Gender equality is one of the main issues that Cameroonian women and girls are battling with, among other socio-political and economic problems. And COVID-19 has come to worsen it all. Before the pandemic, women and girls, had issues of gender-based violence in diverse forms, harmful cultural practices, and even women leaders took upon themselves to be able to address this gender-based violence on the field. And with the coming of coronavirus, the COVID-19, it became worse because some of the issues that they tried to address, we kind of saw that we're not coming back to the state at which we started, because things like child marriages and female genital mutilation became more, the issues like coronavirus and female genital mutilation were being practiced during the coronavirus because the girls and their parents are in the confinements and they want to use that opportunity to be able to, do what they think the culture warrants them to do. And so I think that for Cameroon, COVID-19 has come to worsen the gender inequalities that women are facing. But in the midst of all this, Cuso Cameroon was able to provide us with psychosocial support, as I can say, because they organized a training that we benefited from to understand really what the COVID-19 was and the measures to take, based on the WHO measures and the Cameroonian government measures that we put in place. But I want to say that with gender equalities in Cameroon, the Cameroonian government has a political will to address the issues in Cameroon. Cameroon is a signatory to many conventions, including the CEDAW Convention and even the UN Resolution 1325, which calls on women's participation in peace-building processes. The ministry has the government has created a ministry in charge of gender and has ratified instruments in favor of gender equality. The publication of a penal code is also one of the achievements of the government, drawing a national action plan to be able to monitor the implementation of Resolution 1325. and also designing a multi-sector plan on child marriage in Cameroon. The creation of a gender desks have been created in different police stations and gendarme brigades. And also there is the creation of shelters so girls and women to be able to rest when they have issues of gender-based violence. So as I said, the situation of COVID-19 is really, really disturbing the work that the women are putting on the ground and bringing women and government stakeholders to think more on strategies that could be best used to address the issues. The government in its place is helping to raise awareness on the issue, but us as civil society organizations, we are also there to ensure that the partners with whom we work, getting the knowledge from Cuso, we'll be able to train other community women on how to produce even personal protection equipment like hand washing soap, like the face mask, and other equipment that are necessary to be able to prevent the pandemic in Cameroon. So I would say that gender equality in Cameroon at the moment is an issue because there are many cases that different types of equalities that women and girls face, and the pandemic has come to worsen. However, there are measures that are being put in place to be able to address the issues of COVID-19 in the context of Cameroon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're right, there was some contrast and there were some similarities, as you indicated. But especially, the question that seems to be quite universal with respect to, the public health lockdowns and putting women and children in highly vulnerable situations of household lockdowns where there may be a prehistory of violence, but just the added pressures, etc. And I think the other thing, and you've both set the table beautifully, is that whenever there's a crisis, there's also generally an opportunity, because crises disrupt things. They disrupt relationships and structures, etc. And so how about if we move now to looking at more the programmatic side of what you're both doing in your organizations. And if I can come back to you, Carmen, your organization, Manuela Ramos, which is supporting women and girls in, accessing their basic human rights. Can you share the experience in terms of that space and how COVID has affected it? And you'll have to go off mute. And Justine, if you don't mind going on mute, we will have less feedback. Thank you.
I'd like to share with you another story. This Cuso International supports the women's rights program we have. And I want to give some good news. We have been struggling for parity in Congress for almost 20 years now, almost 20 years. But during the last 3 years of the program, we've been able to gather even conservative women from all parties. And during the pandemic, we accomplished the law of parity has been approved. So finally, we have a law that forces all parties to have one man and a woman, a man and a woman in the list. No longer will women be put at the end of the list. This will provide the opportunity for indigenous population, which are 33% of the Peruvian population, and Afro-Peruvian women that are 3% of the population. That will provide the opportunity for them to be elected to Congress. So this is a good news, despite the pandemic, something to celebrate. And I have another story to celebrate. House workers, domestic workers, I think they are called. They have also been fighting for decades to be accepted as workers and have a schedule, 8-hour schedule and minimum wage. So finally, these workers that have different unions and who have always been supported by feminist organizations, the law was finally approved, also during the pandemic. So things to celebrate despite all the sorrow or the pain that the COVID brings to our countries and to our populations.
So it is a double-edged sword, as we have all experienced. There's some wonderful stories of solidarity that didn't exist pre the pandemic, but this crisis and these challenges have brought very unlikely allies together, which we need to take advantage of and also solidify so that it can continue post a world that's free of this crisis. So thank you very much for that. That's really helpful. Let me come back again to Justine in terms of the work that you're doing in Cuso's partnership with Women in Alternative Action, and how the work that you're doing with Cuso, and then how it's adapting or modifying going forward in the face of the pandemic. If you could share that with us, Justine. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Just to remind us that Women in Alternative Action is a women's human rights organization that is working to promote the rights of women and girls in Cameroon, but also in the Central Africa sub-region as a whole. And we work to promote initiatives that promote gender equality, gender justice, as I can say, and to be able to have societies that are free of gender-based violence. And so some of our programmatic areas include the Gender Justice Program, the Peace Building Initiative, empowering youth for the next generation, economic empowerment for women and girls, and also law review. And with our partnership with Cuso, it all started in 2018 when we had an event to address issues of gender-based violence with the Parliamentary Network on Gender. And so we came in contact with Cuso, and since then we got involved with the Voice program, within which we organized the second Queens for Peace program. Queens for Peace is the initiative of wives of traditional leaders in Cameroon who are being empowered to contribute to community peace building, because their voices are most heard and they are respected by community women. We thought that it is important to engage the queens, who are the wives of the custodians of culture, the traditional leaders. And so we had the first conference that took place in 2012, and then in 2018, we were able to have the second conference. And we actually partnered with Cuso Cameroon to be able to have a successful conference. And this conference brought over 100 queens from the 10 regions of Cameroon, including other stakeholders. An output of this conference was the fact that the women got more awareness on the negative effects of harmful cultural practices that are being meted on women and girls in the different communities of Cameroon. The queens are more aware now, and their capacities were built to be able to implement their own action plans. And so during the conference, they developed a 3-year action plan, which they had to go back to their different regions and implement. In fact, Cameroon has 10 regions, and we had representation from the 10 different regions of Cameroon. With the support of Cuso, we were able to bring them to Yaoundé, the capital city. And when they went back, they had to, start implementing their action plan, because one of the points was that they had to advocate for a law that would put an end to child marriage in Cameroon. And this was being done. And one of the good example, one best practice I would like to share is that one of the queens of the northern region, that's Queen Fanta Mustafa of the Gashiga constituency, had to prohibit or put an end to 5 cases of child marriage that were about to be conducted in her community. After having received the training, after having received knowledge on the negative effects of child marriage, she was able to stop the child marriage in 5 different cases in her community. And because of her good work, she was elected as one of the conveners of COTLA, CODLA is the Council of Traditional Leaders in Africa, an initiative of the UN Women that brought the traditional leaders together to engage them to end harmful cultural practices in the communities like female genital mutilation as well as child marriage. And there's a queen also in the Northwest region of Cameroon who went back and started empowering the young girls with economic skills to be able to have something to do and not depend on their parents or not accept to get married early. Despite the crisis that is happening in those regions, she was able to bring these girls together and empower them. And the girls have had skills that have helped them because of school dropout due to the crisis. When I talk about crisis, I mean that the Cameroonian context today is that which the Northwest region and the Southwest regions of Cameroon are experiencing a crisis since 2016. And so these girls, some of them don't go to school because of school shutdowns. And the queens had to take upon themselves to empower them with other skills that will help them to be able to have their self-esteem that have been shattered by the crisis. And so the 10 regions of Cameroon, these action plans had to be implemented. However, not all were, not all could be implemented, not all the regions could implement their action plans because of the vast nature of the regions and the challenges of having resources to accomplish their action plans. Secondly, I would say that Cuso International supported WA Cameroon in the validation of a draft law for the prohibition and abolition of child marriage in Cameroon. It's an initiative of WA Cameroon and the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and the Family, supported by Urgent Action Fund, Amplify Change, and also Cuso. So Cuso was able to help us, support us technically and financially to be able to have this law validated. And I want to say also that the Cuso program share, WA Cameroon and Cuso are actually implementing that program now. It's a 7 years partnership that has been signed, that it was signed in 2020, and we started the partnership agreements to implement. And we are happy to have been assigned a volunteer, an international volunteer with us, who is helping to design the strategy plan of WA Cameroon for the next 3 years. And she's putting efforts to be able to map out funding organizations based on geographic areas and types of beneficiaries who can support the organization to implement the strategies. The volunteer has also been able to advocate, to support WA staff to advocate for the abolition, for the adoption of a law at the National Assembly, the law on child marriage. And within a short time, she has been able to develop 2 projects that is submitted. She has submitted 2 calls for proposal that have to help us to have the funding that we can use to support our activities. Our fingers are crossed, hoping that we'll be able to have those grants. I want to say that the response to COVID-19, as I said before, WA Cameroon and Cuso have been looking at alternative measures to be able to address the issue. We have been able to organize campaigns on the ground with the support of Cuso, because we know that with this crisis, with the COVID-19 crisis, women are at the forefront of activities. They are the breadwinners. They have to take care of their families, their children, and they won't stay at home to do this. They have to go to the field, they have to go to their farms and to the markets to be able to provide food for their children and their families. And so we continue to carry out activities that will help these partners on the ground at the grassroots level to be able to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So we really remain indebted to Cuso International for the support. And one last one is that in 2019, WA Cameroon was able to do a review on SDG 16, Sustainable Development Goal number 16, on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, to provide a national voluntary review from the civil society perspective, and Cuso actually participated in this research and in the validation of the reports. So there's a lot to say about the collaboration with Cuso, and we see that it is actually gaining grounds, it's actually having impact, and the staff in my organization are very appreciative of the support that Cuso is providing. And I think we'll go a long way to improve the gender inequalities in our communities because of this partnership. Thank you.
Justine, thank you so much. And it's such a great story of the contribution and role of the volunteer that is with you. It's a great story that is told and told and told again across the Cuso family for so many decades. And I know it just gives everyone back in the team at Cuso here in Canada, it just gives them, you know, fresh energy, and it's like fresh air to hear those stories. So thank you so much for that. And also for raising the question, which we often forget in this, I've noticed over the last year, how infrequently we hear about the SDGs, and we cannot forget the SDGs. We're in, you know, that last 9 years of those, and they're a roadmap for the recovery from this pandemic. And so we have to make sure that we keep remembering it, especially as you say, SDG 16. I really want to leave enough time for questions. And so let me just move back to both of you. You know, I tend to look at a lot of data. It gets aggregated, it gets cut and sorted and diced and, you know, forensically looked at, etc. But I never forget that behind every data point, there is a human face. There's a person with brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and mothers, etc. And so, you know, for all of us here today, I'm going to ask you each, you can toss a coin for who goes first, but perhaps I can give Justine a moment to catch her breath. But can you Carmen, can I start with you? And can you share kind of one of those human stories that kind of gives you that energy to keep at it and know that what you're doing, you're on the right track, and there's lots of impact that Cuso and organizations like Manuela Rosa can do. I'll turn it over to you, Carmen. And if you can just go off and mute.
I can share with you what we just accomplished in March 8th. We used to demonstrate in the streets, but we cannot go out in the streets. So with less than 15 days, we decided that we were going to have activities through internet. And we were going to have a platform to show activities of all groups that we could get hold of. And with little anticipation, we were able to come up with a program of 50 activities, showing house workers and how they did their work, common pots. I don't know there's such a word in English, but it's women gathering and cooking together in shanty towns. They were able to show how they struggled to get food for their families, and we were able to get funding while they were presenting this activity. And there were also trans men and trans women presenting how they have to struggle with the fact that they cannot even work because they don't have an identity accepted. We had groups fighting abortion. We had groups that provide psychological services through internet, through phone calls. So all sorts of groups coming together, and these are women groups all over the country and feminine groups working together. This has been the story of the feminist movement during decades. But this coming together, like one supporting the other, one providing the flyer, providing the platform for the presentation. That I haven't seen for a long time. And this came in 3 days. And we had the 6th, 7th, and 8th of March, and all type of activity together. So this is about solidarity. So solidarity has increased, and global solidarity as well. And the fact that Cuso is supporting feminist organizations in Peru, and the fight of women to end misfortune of women in other countries. This is about global solidarity. And this is something that has increased. And one last thing, we have a volunteer program. And we in Manuela Ramos used to get like 100 applicants each year. But this year, when we launched our program, we got 500 applicants. 500. This is a program supported by Cuso. And this is alliance of international volunteers and national volunteers all together. So I think that's the kind of program that Cuso could provide in any part of the world, because it's actually about putting women together, national and international. I'm a fan of that.
Thank you very much for that. And certainly we're seeing evidence of increased solidarity at community levels and other levels, including political alliances. So one will hope that we can keep that momentum going. Justine, the same question to you. Can you think of one story that can kind of illustrate what you experienced?
Yeah, Rosemary, I can say that the fact that we're able to bring the wives of traditional leaders to engage them in community peace building and in ending harmful cultural practices in Cameroon gives me the energy to go forward. This is because in most of the communities in Cameroon, you know, the traditional leaders are those that have the yam and the knife, and they believe that the women have to be in the palaces and do the chores and take care of their children while there. But when we came out with this program on empowering the wives of traditional leaders, the queens, we saw that even their husbands became very, very interested in the program, and they decided to let them come to attend the meetings. One of the strategies that we used was to go through their husbands to be able to identify those queens that they would want to attend the meetings. I'm saying so because in Cameroon, the traditional leaders, you know, they get married to multiple wives. And so it was not our duty to select which of the wives could come for the meeting. They used to have their traditional leaders union every year, annually, and the wives would come together with them, but they would have nothing doing. They would stay in the hotel rooms and they would have nothing to do. So we thought that it was important to have parallel sessions with their wives so that they can also learn to contribute to community development, but also to contribute to ending gender-based violence in their community. So that's how we came about the Queens for Peace, being an alternative or a parallel to the Funds Union in Cameroon. And so when they give their testimonies, we are very happy. And you know, the fact also that we're engaging the young people in different actions, in community peace building, in we organize holiday programs with these young people where the boys and the girls come together to learn about peace issues, and able to learn from one another on peace building. I'm emphasizing on peace building because the situation in our country is that which calls for continuous peace building and engaging the young people at a very early age to act as community connectors for peace. So we are building open spaces for youth participation in peace building processes in Cameroon. Even though we have difficulties with the crisis, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that we are getting there because we can't stop doing the work. So all of this gives me energy, and to know that Cuso also is supporting, it gives us all the assurance that we can keep doing the work to achieve better results.
Thank you for that. And it's a good reminder that, that in fact, youth is important for us to make sure that inclusiveness, that youth are at these tables and in these fora. But I also think that as we engage them as allies and partners, they will actually create greater space because of their energy and their courage, etc. So, I think there's many, many reasons, and thank you for reminding us of that. I'm very conscious of time, and I think you've done just wonderfully in setting us up very much in terms of the DNA of Cuso, which is around partnerships and people. I'm going to turn it back to Tina. It's kind of like the Academy Awards or whatever, to tell us what you all said in the audience regarding our polling. Tina, over to you.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, everyone. So it should be up on your screen right now. I have shared the poll results. So as it relates to the first question around gender equality and human rights, I won't go through them just in the interest of time, but you could see those percentages there, Rosemary.
Yep.
And I will go to the second one. And here are the results for the second one in reference to partnership programs, which I think you all really dove into really well. So these are the percentages for that.
Super.
Okay.
Yep, thanks so much for that. It's interesting, and we were a little bit, what would I say, mischievous perhaps? We were going to give you all of the above as a fourth option. And we had a little discussion a couple of weeks ago and said, no, let's make people choose, because we always, everything, but of course in civil society, we always have to prioritize. So those are very helpful. And the education one isn't a surprise. It's confirming. Something I was reading that in the last few days was some new data that's showing that at the height of the pandemic in September, October, 1.6 billion children were out of school. 1.6 billion children, and that's out of school. And of course, with all of the online efforts, etc. But the other part of that was the expectation is that there will be somewhere above 11 million girls who will never return to school after the pandemic is over, when it's safe to be back and schools are open around the world. We will have lost them. We'll have lost them to the things Justine was talking about, early and forced marriage and economic imperatives, etc. So it sounds to me like we're on the right track at Cuso in terms of our focus. So thanks so much, Tina, for that. I'm going to open it to questions. There have been a couple of questions come in, and there were a couple of advanced questions, but I'm going to turn to one that collects two parts of kind of a similar slant for both of you. It was, how are governments supporting your groundbreaking partnership initiatives? And the other question that goes to government was, what's the impact? Are you already feeling the impact of government finances, given what's happened with the pandemic to most economies around the world? And perhaps maybe what you need to do with that last one is project. Are you fearful of what's going to happen to civil society, to financial resources, to your programs? Carmen, shall I start with you, Carmen?
Yes. The history that we know is that when there is less money, the first you cut money going to women. Yeah, that's the history that we again and again see. They reduce the budget of the Ministry of Women. So far, they have not been able to do that because we have complained and in coalition, as we always work, all feminist organizations and women organizations, we have complained and we as civil society have been very vocal. But there is fear. There are what we call fundamentalist. There's a political crisis in Peru, and the society people do not believe in parties. So it's less and less, the elections that are coming will show that each party will get very little, with each party getting a very little percentage of attraction. That is very complicated, because a small a party with only 9% or 10% could get to the second round in the elections. And there's a threat. There's a threat that evangelical groups represented by a very right-wing candidate could win, at least could go through the second round of election. And in that case, we know that they will have a strong Congress representation. And so we fear that budgets for women, budgets for programs will be reduced. So we will have to struggle a lot to maintain the funding we have now and to increase it, to fight for it. We have good relations right now. The Minister of Women is a feminist, but for sure we are very fearful of who will be the government elected with such minimum percentages. So we know that the months to come, the years to come, are going to be the years of biggest struggles. So it's gonna be more difficult, but we have confidence in the strong alliances we have built among women groups, and also the strong alliance we have with women in the media. Women, the media, as usual, is under the ownership of big corporations, but we have allies. We have women and some men who are supportive. So we really look forward to that. And we also look forward to the day we can come back to the street and continue fighting for our rights.
Right. Justine, did you want to come in on this question around finances?
Yeah, I want to say that we don't receive direct funding from the government, but what is important is that civil society complements the efforts of the government on the ground. And it is important that the governments of Cameroon, especially the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and the Family, supports our actions on the ground, because they know that our actions are impactful. We deliver our results are seen, are visible. And so we get collaboration with the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and the Family on almost all our actions that we carry on the ground. We don't receive direct funding, but in some cases, when there is an event, for example, during the second Prince of Peace conference, we received a package from the minister herself to be able to support that event to happen. And so the way we raise our funding is through applications, grants. We submit applications for grants and we get them. And the government also, through the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and the Family, sometimes give recommendations to the partners or to the funders when they need them. So I can say that we gain moral support from the government. We have them available to attend our events, and when they are present, there's credibility in the work that you do. When they attend your events and they support you morally, it gives you the credibility of the work that you are doing on the ground. So we are very collaborative with our governments, with the relevant ministries, especially the Ministry of Gender, that is supporting our work in all aspects. They also come to us to consult on specific thematic areas, especially like we have the National Action Plan on Resolution 1325. We are being consulted on reviewing the first generation National Action Plan and trying to develop the second national plan for Cameroon. And so I can say that even though we don't receive direct funding from the government, we have the moral support and they consult us when they need information and when they need technical support from civil society organizations.
Thanks so much for that. There's a question that's directed to you from a public health expert in Pakistan who's asking, you know, what are the specific types of injustices you've been encountering in doing your job in Cameroon?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
It seems it's a question from our public health expert in Pakistan. Shahid's asking, you know, what are the kinds of injustices that you're encountering in your work in Cameroon? You raise this SDG 16 and some other legal innovations that you're involved in.
Well, with the SDG 16, Cameroon was under review in 2019 at the higher level political forum in New York at the UN. And so civil society had to contribute to the government's key messages. The government had to present the key messages and were consulted. I can say that the injustices that we face in Cameroon are diverse based on the different domains. For example, people who want to have the freedom to speech, people want to have the freedom to expression, and people, especially women, they will want to have equalities. You know, because of gender inequalities, the women will need gender justice to be able to, you know, ensure that they are placed at the same level with the men. But we find out that in the governance process, in the governance structure in Cameroon, there are fewer women than men in decision making. And so those are some of the injustices that women face on the ground. But to say that we have a direct solution to those injustices, it takes time. And I say the government sometimes have the political will to address those injustices, but it takes time. The process is gradual, and you know the women to keep pushing, you know, forming different groups, coalitions to ensure that the injustices that are meted on women are kind of, you know, mitigated. So, well, the women in particular, but the Cameroonian community, the Cameroonian society at large, they're expecting a lot from the government in terms of justice, yes, in terms of justice, as I can say. Thank you.
Thanks so much. There are a number of questions, and I'm very conscious of our time. I think some of them can be answered in the box itself by Carmen. There's a couple of specific questions for you, Carmen. But perhaps I need to close off the questions in general. I think some of them have been answered in the conversation itself in terms of how some of your programs have survived, et cetera, given COVID and issues underlying culture, et cetera, that's so fundamental. I think what we need to do is unfortunately draw our town hall to a close. I have to say that there's been a number of important points, and all of us who are on the call will continue to talk about afterwards and hopefully share something out to you, you know, starting with Carmen talking about the two types of pandemic and the revealing of the pre-existing underlying inequities that have been so dramatically brought into the limelight. I think there's some very important points, Justine, that you made in terms of the need for political participation, legal regulatory changes, and institutions like the ministry that has been established in charge of gender and the work that you're doing on child marriage, et cetera. So it's always, as we all know, in advocacy that there's no one way to do it. You really need to have a 360-degree approach to it. But But just to say, there were so many important points, you know, in the chat room. It was, you know, don't forget we need to engage men and boys. It shouldn't all be on women to carry the load to gender equality, etc. So let me thank the panelists so very much for joining, Justine and Carmen, from your respective geographies. Thank you all for the questions and for listening and for the polling. And I am going to turn it back to our Chief Operating Officer, Tina, who's been brilliant in putting all of this together. So over to you, Tina.
So yeah, just 30 seconds in closing. Thank you all. Thank you, Rosemary McCarney, Carmen Espinoza, Justine Cauchu, Num Kumche, for all the work that you're doing to support the outcomes of women and girls. And in closing, as Rosemary said, we will be getting to the questions that we did not get to live. So just be a little bit patient. We'll respond to you in an email. So I would like to sometimes leave closing remarks, but I think Rosemary did that very nicely and summed up everyone's comments. So in the end, you will be receiving a short survey. We also always appreciate your feedback. You'll also be receiving the recording of this town hall to play over any bits that you may have missed. So thank you again for supporting Cuso International. Thank you for your service. In solidarity, bye for now.